The veteran Craxian soldier sat in the dimly lit bar on Station Omega 7, his four arms wrapped around a large mug of fermented algae brew. His scales, once a proud crimson, had dulled to a muddy brown with age and stress. Around him, younger soldiers from various species laughed and boasted about their recent victories against pirates and smugglers. None of them had fought in a real war. None of them had faced humanity. "You younglings think you know war," Vextor muttered, his voice carrying the weight of memories he wished he could forget. The laughter died down as heads turned toward him. Everyone knew Vextor had survived the Human Galactic War 20 cycles ago. Few veterans remained who could tell that tale. A young Zealothi warrior, his feathers still bright with youth, scoffed. The humans? They're traitors now. Soft beings who sell their technology and entertainment across the galaxy. What could they have done that was so terrible? Vextor's compound eyes focused on the youth, and something in his gaze made the Zealothy's feathers flatten against his body. Soft? You think humans are soft? A bitter laugh escaped his mandibles. Let me tell you about the Battle of Kepler, 442b. Let me tell you what happens when you push humanity to war. The bar had gone completely silent. Even the bartender, a gelatinous blob who never stopped moving, had paused in cleaning glasses. The Galactic Council thought it would be easy, Vextor began, his lower arms gesturing while his upper arms remained wrapped around his drink. Humanity had only been spacefaring for 50 of their years. Their ships were primitive compared to ours. Their weapons were projectile-based, not energy weapons like civilized species used. We outnumbered them 10-1. He took a long drink before continuing. The Council wanted their home system. Earth sat in prime real estate, perfect for trade routes. When the humans refused to relocate, the Council decided to take it by force. After all, what could one young species do against the combined might of 47 advanced civilizations? A Thorian merchant who had been listening from a nearby table moved closer. But, surely with such numbers, the victory was swift. Vextor turned to look at him, and the merchant stepped back at the expression on the old soldier's face. Swift? The war lasted 8 of their years. 8 years that felt like 80. You want to know the first lesson we learned about humans? They don't fight like us. They don't follow the civilized rules of warfare that the rest of the galaxy had agreed upon for millennia. The veteran's voice grew quieter, forcing everyone to lean in. The Council sent the First Fleet to blockade Earth. 300 ships, each one a masterpiece of engineering. Admiral Krell commanded from the Dreadnought's supremacy. He broadcast the terms of surrender, gave them 1 solar day to respond. You know what the humans sent back? The young soldiers shook their heads. Nothing. Not a word. We thought they were debating, maybe panicking. The Admiral was actually laughing, saying they were too frightened to even respond. Then, exactly 1 hour before the deadline, we detected launches from Earth's surface. Primitive chemical rockets, the type they've been using for barely a century. Hundreds of them, heading straight for our fleet. A Rigelian engineer snorted. Chemical rockets against shield technology? That's not even a threat. That's what we thought, Vextor said. Our point defense systems didn't even bother firing. Why waste energy on such primitive weapons? The rockets would bounce off our shields like pebbles. Except, he paused, his scales rippling with remembered fear. Except they weren't aimed at us. The confusion in the room was palpable. Vextor continued. The rockets flew past our fleet, out into empty space. We laughed harder. The humans had missed. Their primitive targeting systems had failed. Admiral Krell was composing a mocking response when the rockets detonated. In empty space? The young Zealothy looked puzzled. What damage could that do? They weren't weapons, Vextor said slowly. They were delivery systems. Each rocket released millions of tiny objects. Ball bearings, the humans called them. Simple metal spheres, each no bigger than your smallest digit. They spread out in carefully calculated patterns, moving at different velocities. Understanding began to dawn on some of the more technically minded listeners. The Rigelian engineer's face had gone pale. No, they didn't. Oh, but they did, Vextor confirmed. Do you know what happens when a ship traveling at significant fractions of light speed hits a cloud of metal spheres? Our shields were designed for energy weapons, for large projectiles, not for millions of tiny impacts across every surface. It was like flying through a sandstorm at relativistic speeds. He gestured with all four arms now, painting the picture. The first ships to hit the clouds, their shields overloaded in seconds. The spheres tore through hull plating like it was paper. The supremacy, pride of the Craxian fleet, was reduced to Swiss cheese in under a minute. 300 ships entered that trap. 17 limped out. The bar was deathly quiet now. Someone in the back whispered, 17 out of 300? And that was just the beginning, Vextor said. That was the day we learned the first rule about humans at war. They don't think like us. Where we saw empty space, they saw a battlefield they could prepare. Where we brought our greatest technology, they brought creativity and ruthlessness. The young Zealothy warrior, his earlier bravado completely gone, asked quietly, what happened next? Vextor ordered another drink before answering. The council was furious. They sent the second and third fleets, 1,000 ships this time. But word of what the humans had done spread across their world. Every human seemed to become a warrior overnight. Children built weapons in their educational facilities. Elderly humans who could barely walk volunteered for suicide missions. Their entertainment industry started producing what they called propaganda films that turned their entire population into fanatics. He shuddered. But the worst part was their military doctrine. Every species in the galaxy fought to disable enemy ships to force surrenders. It was civilized. Prisoners were taken, ransoms paid, territories negotiated. Humans fought to kill. No warnings, no negotiations, no mercy. A vegan diplomat who had been quietly listening spoke up. Surely that's an exaggeration. No civilized species would civilized? Vextor laughed bitterly. That's the thing about humans. They could be the most civilized, peaceful, friendly species you'll ever meet. They'll trade fairly, share their art, help strangers in need. But threaten them? Attack their home? They become something else entirely. Something that keeps old soldiers like me awake at night. He drained his mug and signaled for another. You want to know what they did when the Second Fleet demanded their surrender? They sent a message back. Just 4 words. Come and take it. Ancient words from their history, apparently. Then, they did something that violated every rule of war in the Codex. The tension in the bar was thick enough to cut. Vextor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They turned their own system into a weapon. They moved asteroids into shipping lanes. They seeded their entire outer system with automated weapons platforms disguised as debris. They even considered destroying their own moon to create a debris field that would make Earth inaccessible for centuries. Destroy their own moon? The Rigelian looked horrified. That would have devastated their own planet. That's what you younglings don't understand, Vextor said. Humans have a concept they call scorched Earth. They would rather destroy everything, including themselves, than let an enemy take it. The council thought they were bluffing. Right up until human engineers actually started placing fusion bombs on their moon surface. The old soldier's scales had taken on a grayish hue as he lost himself in the memories. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when they started boarding our ships. You see, we had shields, better armor, superior weapons. In ship-to-ship combat, we had every advantage. So the humans decided not to fight ship-to-ship. He paused, gathering himself for what came next. The entire bar waited in breathless silence. They built small craft, barely big enough for 1 or 2 humans. No shields, minimal armor, just engines and explosives. They would accelerate to insane speeds and ram our ships. Sometimes the pilot would eject just before impact. Sometimes they wouldn't. They called them mosquitoes. Small, annoying, and deadly in swarms. A maintenance worker near the back made a sound of disbelief. Suicide attacks? But that's barbaric. Is it? Vextor challenged. Or is it the ultimate commitment to defending your home? Every human pilot who flew those missions was a volunteer. They lined up by the thousands for the chance to die taking out a council ship. Their media called them heroes. Their children learned their names in school. The vegan diplomat looked disturbed. How could their government ask such sacrifices of their people? Ask. Vextor laughed, but there was no humor in it. Their government tried to stop them at first, wanted to keep to conventional warfare. But humans have this thing called grassroots movements. Individual humans started building weapons in their homes. Civilian ships were retrofitted with weapons. Their commercial pilots formed militias. By the end of the first year, their government wasn't leading the war effort anymore. They were just trying to coordinate it. He gestured around the bar. Every species here, we fight wars with our military. Professional soldiers, trained and equipped by the state. Humans? When humans go to war, really go to war, every single one of them becomes a soldier. The baker who sold you bread yesterday becomes a saboteur. The teacher educating younglings becomes a tactical instructor. The artist painting beautiful pictures starts designing camouflage patterns. The young Zealothi warrior found his voice again. But we had technology far beyond theirs. Energy weapons, force fields, FTL drives they could barely understand. Technology, Vextor spat the word like a curse. Let me tell you about human adaptation. First battle, our energy weapons cut through their ships like butter. Second battle, they had ablative armor that could take several hits. Third battle, they had figured out the frequency modulation of our weapons and had reflective plating that bounced our beams back at us. He leaned forward, his voice intense. It took our scientists decades to develop shield technology. Humans reverse-engineered it from wreckage in 6 months. Not perfect copies, but good enough. They couldn't match our technology, so they innovated around it. Where we had tradition and established doctrine, they had flexibility and imagination. The bartender, who had been silently listening, finally spoke. I heard rumors about what happened at the siege of Proxima Station. Is it true that humans don't? Vextor cut him off sharply. Some stories shouldn't be told in mixed company. But yes, it's probably true. Whatever horrible thing you heard, it's probably true and likely understated. The old Craxian soldier ordered his third drink, and the bartender didn't even charge him. Nobody wanted to interrupt the story now. Even beings who had entered the bar for a quick refreshment found themselves drawn to the gathering crowd around Vextor. The council kept escalating. Vextor continued, his voice carrying the exhaustion of old trauma. They sent fleet after fleet. The humans kept finding new ways to fight back. When we adapted to their kinetic weapons, they developed biological ones. When we shielded against those, they turned to cyber warfare. When we isolated our systems, they found ways to corrupt our AI assistants. A young Altarian pilot raised a tentacle timidly. But surely the humans took heavy losses? Their population couldn't sustain such warfare. Heavy losses? Vextor's mandibles clicked in what might have been dark amusement. They lost millions. Entire cities turned to glass when our bombardments got through. Their colony on Mars was completely destroyed. You know what they did? They turned their dead into weapons too. The crowd recoiled. Someone whispered, "What do you mean?" Human culture has always honored their dead, Vextor explained. They have elaborate rituals, monuments, entire fields dedicated to the fallen. During the war, they started broadcasting the names of every human killed. 24 hours a day, on every frequency, in every human language. Just names, ages, and where they were from. Do you have any idea what that does to morale? He looked around the room. Imagine trying to sleep in your bunk, and all you hear is Sarah Chun, age 27, Shanghai. Michael Roberts, age 19, London. Amara Okafor, age 34, Lagos. Hour after hour, day after day. The humans made sure we knew exactly who we were killing. Made sure we understood that each death only made the survivors fight harder. The Rigelian engineer spoke up again. There had to be voices for peace. Not all humans could have supported such total war. Oh, there were peace movements, Vextor acknowledged. At first. But the council made a fatal error. After the Third Fleet was ambushed near Jupiter, Admiral Thax ordered a reprisal bombardment of Earth. Targeted what he thought was a military installation. turned out to be something the humans called a children's hospital. The bar collectively winced. Even in war, certain targets were considered untouchable by every civilized species. 200 young humans died in that attack, Vextor said quietly. The peace movements disappeared overnight. The humans have a saying, "You've woken the sleeping giant." After that hospital burned, every human alive seemed to take it personally. We started finding human volunteers as young as 16 in damage fighters. Their elderly were building weapons in retirement homes. We captured one human ship crewed entirely by what they called cancer patients, humans who were already dying and decided to take some of us with them. A Centaurian trader who had been listening from the doorway moved closer. I've dealt with humans for decades. They're reasonable beings. Surely negotiations were attempted. The council tried, Vextor admitted. After the Fourth Fleet was destroyed by what the humans called Operation Stalingrad, apparently named after some ancient battle on their world, the council offered terms. The humans could keep their system, pay tribute, accept a garrison force. Standard conquest terms that any reasonable species would accept to end the bloodshed. And, the trader prompted, the human response was broadcast on all channels. Not from their government, but from what seemed to be a random human female standing in the ruins of New York. She looked directly into the camera and spoke 2 words, "No surrender." Then, she went back to welding armor plates onto a ground vehicle. Vextor's scales rippled with remembered frustration. That's when we realized we weren't fighting a government or even a military. We were fighting an entire species that had collectively decided they would rather die than submit. How do you defeat that? How do you negotiate with that? The young Zealothy warrior, who had been silent for a while, spoke up. But the war did end. The humans are still here. What changed? What changed? Vextor laughed bitterly. The humans started winning. That's what changed. By year 5 of the war, they weren't just defending anymore. They had reverse-engineered our FTL drives, improved them, and started hitting our supply lines. They had learned our tactics, our weaknesses, our psychology. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But the real turning point was when they started taking the war to council worlds. You see, for 5 years, all the fighting had been in human space. Council citizens watched it on news feeds, safe and comfortable. Then human ships started appearing in our space. Not invasion fleets, just small groups. Ghost ships, we called them. The bartender refilled Vextor's mug without being asked. What do these ghost ships do? Nothing violent at first, Vextor said. They would appear in a system, broadcast recordings of the war. Show council citizens what was really happening. Pictures of destroyed human cities, recordings of human children learning to build bombs in school, footage of human soldiers, some barely adults, dying to protect their world. The council tried to jam the signals, but the humans always found new frequencies. A Procyon businessman frowned. Propaganda is hardly a war-winning strategy. It wasn't propaganda if it was true, Vextor countered. And then the ghost ships started doing more than broadcasting. They would appear near civilian stations and just wait. Not attacking, not threatening, just sitting there, reminding everyone that humans could reach them now. That the war was no longer something happening far away. He took a long drink. The psychological effect was devastating. Council worlds that had supported the war started having second thoughts. Citizens who had been told we were bringing civilization to primitive humans were seeing evidence of a highly motivated, increasingly capable enemy that was bringing the war home. But surely the council military could protect, someone started. Protect against what? Vextor interrupted. The humans weren't following any playbook we knew. Sometimes the ghost ships would leave after a few days. Sometimes they would broadcast human music, classical pieces they called requiems that were hauntingly beautiful and deeply unsettling. Sometimes they would drop containers that turned out to be filled with human food and art, gifts to the civilians of the species trying to destroy them. He shook his head. Do you understand the psychological warfare in that? Here were the primitive barbarians showing more civilization than the council. Here were the people we were trying to exterminate, sharing their culture with our civilians. The contradiction broke something in the council's propaganda machine. The vegan diplomat looked thoughtful. That's remarkably sophisticated for a species at war. That's the thing about humans, Vextor said. They could be sophisticated and savage in the same breath. One ghost ship would deliver humanitarian supplies to a station hit by raiders. The next would deploy what they called area denial weapons, mines that would make entire shipping lanes unusable for decades. He leaned back, his forearms gesturing expressively. By year 6, Council military forces were stretched thin. We were fighting an enemy that had gone from barely space-faring to tactically brilliant in half a decade. Worse, they were outbuilding us. Where it took us a year to construct a dreadnought, humans were putting together functional warships in 2 months. They weren't pretty, they weren't elegant, but they worked. Ow! The Rigelian engineer looked baffled. Their industrial base couldn't possibly match 47 civilizations. Because they did something we never imagined, Vextor explained. They turned their entire economy to war production. Every factory that made ground vehicles started making fighters. Every shipyard that built cargo haulers started building warships. Their entertainment industry became their propaganda ministry. Their schools became military academies. Their hospitals became triage centers that also researched biological weapons. He paused, letting that sink in. But the real genius was their standardization. Council forces had 47 different types of equipment, 47 different command structures, 47 different military doctrines. Humans had one goal: survival. That unity of purpose made them more efficient than our combined might. A Betelgeuse, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I was a supply officer during the war. The things I heard about human logistics still give me nightmares. Is it true they were cannibalizing their own infrastructure? Vextor nodded grimly. By year 7, they were stripping monuments from metal. Historical buildings were torn down for materials. They melted down statues of their heroes to make ammunition. Museums gave up priceless artifacts to be turned into weapons. When we realized they were literally destroying their own history to fight us, some of us began to understand we could never win. But that's insane. The young Zealothi protested. To destroy your own culture. Is it insane? Vextor challenged. Or is it the ultimate statement of priorities? They could rebuild monuments. They could recreate art. They couldn't recreate their species if we won. Every human understood that. From their leaders to their youngest citizens, they all understood this was extinction-level warfare. The crowd had grown larger now, beings abandoning their own tables to hear the story. Vextor noticed, but continued anyway. These youngsters needed to understand. The Battle of Wolf 359 was where everything changed, he said. The Council had assembled the largest fleet in galactic history. 5,000 ships from every member species. The humans had maybe 500 vessels, most of them converted civilian ships with welded-on weapons. We thought it would be a massacre. He paused dramatically. We were right. It was a massacre. Just not the way we expected. Ow! Multiple voices asked simultaneously. The humans had learned from every previous engagement. They knew they couldn't match us ship for ship, so they didn't try. Instead, they turned Wolf 359 into a killing field. They had spent months seeding the entire system with automated weapons, dormant until activated. They had moved asteroids to create gravitational anomalies that would pull ships off course. They had even induced solar flares from the star itself. The Rigelian engineers' eyes widened. They induced stellar activity? That's theoretical at best. Humans have a saying, Vextor replied. Theory is for peacetime. War is for whatever works. They hit our fleet from 17 different directions simultaneously. Kinetic weapons, energy beams stolen from our own designs, biological agents, cyber attacks, gravitational distortions, and things we still don't have names for. But the worst part was their coordination. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. 500 human ships moved like a single organism. No hesitation, no confusion, perfect synchronization. We later learned they had implemented something they called a hive mind protocol, voluntary neural linking between ship crews. They literally shared thoughts during battle. The psychological toll on the human crews was enormous, but it made them unbeatable in tactical combat. The Council fleet, Someone asked, though they seemed afraid of the answer. 3,000 ships destroyed. 1,000 surrendered. 1,000 fled. The humans lost 400 of their 500 ships, but they considered it acceptable losses. That's when the council finally understood what every human had known from day one. They would pay any price for victory. A silence fell over the bar. The weight of the numbers was staggering. Finally, the vegan diplomat asked, "What happened after Wolf 359? Reality set in," Vextor said simply. The council had lost over half its total military force. Member species started withdrawing their support. Some even started reaching out to the humans for separate peace agreements. The humans, to their credit, accepted every surrender with dignity. They didn't seek revenge on species that withdrew from the conflict. But the council leadership, the diplomat prompted, refused to accept defeat. Vextor finished. They ordered the construction of a planet-killer weapon, something that could crack Earth like an egg from outside their system. When word of this reached the humans, he shuddered. That's when we learned there were depths to human warfare we hadn't even imagined. The crowd around Vextor had grown so large that beings were standing on tables to see over others. The bartender had stopped all pretense of working, fully absorbed in the story. Even passing station security had paused at the doorway, drawn by the gravity of the narrative. When the humans learned about the planet killer, Vextor continued, his voice now hoarse with emotion. Something fundamental changed in them. Before, they had been fighting for survival. Now, they were fighting to make a point. They called it Project Damocles, named after some ancient Earth legend about a sword hanging by a thread. A newly arrived Andromedan asked quietly, "What was Project Damocles?" "Mutually assured destruction on a galactic scale," Vextor replied. The humans sent a message to every council world, every neutral planet, every space station in known space. The message was simple. If Earth dies, everyone dies. The bar erupted in shocked murmurs. The old soldier raised his voice over the noise. They weren't bluffing. Human ships, the ghost ships we had learned to fear, appeared in every major system simultaneously. Each one carried something the humans called nova bombs, weapons designed to trigger stellar collapse. They parked these ships near 300 suns and waited. That's genocide on an unimaginable scale, the vegan diplomat breathed. They would have destroyed hundreds of civilizations. Yes, Vextor agreed. And every human ship broadcasted the same message on repeat. We didn't start this war. We don't want this war. But if you force us to extinction, we will not go alone. They gave the council 72 hours to abandon the Planet Killer project and sue for peace. The young Zealoty warrior, who had long since lost all his bravado, asked, "What did the council do?" For the first time in its 1,000-year history, the Galactic Council experienced true fear, Vextor said. They tried to call the humans' bluff, sending strike teams to destroy the ghost ships. The teams found the ships had no crews. They were fully automated, with dead-man switches. If they lost contact with Earth for any reason, they would detonate. Destroying them would trigger the very catastrophe the Council was trying to prevent. A Syrian merchant who had been listening intently spoke up. But surely cooler heads prevailed? The Council wouldn't risk— "You didn't know High Admiral Zerk then," Vextor interrupted. He was Thraxian, from a warrior culture that had never lost a war. He couldn't accept that primitives had outmaneuvered the Council. On the 61st hour, he ordered the Planet Killer moved into position. The tension in the bar was suffocating. Everyone knew Earth still existed, but hearing how close it had come to annihilation was sobering. What happened next broke every military protocol in existence. Vextor continued. Individual ship captains started refusing orders. The crew of the Planet Killer itself mutinied. Council admirals from different species began fighting among themselves. The mighty Galactic Council, which had stood united for a millennium, tore itself apart in less than 3 days. He took another drink, his hands shaking slightly. I was there when the human ultimatum expired. Every screen in the galaxy showed the same image: Earth, blue and white, fragile and beautiful. Then, a human appeared, not a leader or a general, just an ordinary human. She spoke in the most commonly used galactic trade language. Vextor's voice took on a different quality as he recited from memory, "We are humanity. We are teachers and builders, artists and dreamers. We create beauty and seek knowledge. We laugh, we love, we hope, but threaten our existence, and we become death itself. We have shown you we can end everything. Now let us show you we can choose not to. The war is over. Not because you have won, but because we choose to be better than what you have forced us to become." The bar was utterly silent. Many beings had tears or their species equivalent. And then, someone whispered. "Then, the humans did something nobody expected," Vextor said. "They recalled every ghost ship, deactivated every Nova bomb, sent medical supplies to worlds affected by the fighting, started broadcasting technical specifications for terraforming technology to help rebuild destroyed ecosystems. They won the war and immediately started trying to heal its wounds." The Procyon businessman looked skeptical. "Just like that? After 8 years of total war?" "Not just like that," Vextor corrected. "The peace negotiations took another 2 years. The humans had conditions. The Galactic Council as it existed was dissolved. A new body was formed with humanity as a full member with veto power. Reparations were paid, not to humanity, but to every world that had suffered in the conflict. And, most importantly, a new law was added to the Galactic Codex." "What law?" several voices asked. "The Human Clause," Vextor said. "It states that any attempt to completely destroy a sapient species triggers automatic mutual defense obligations from all other members." Essentially, the humans made xenocide illegal and enforceable. They turned their threat of mutual destruction into a promise of mutual protection. The Altarian pilot waved a tentacle thoughtfully. But how did the other species react? Surely there was resentment. At first, yes, Vextor admitted. But then something strange happened. The humans started sharing technology freely. Not weapons technology, but medical, agricultural, entertainment. They sent teachers to help rebuild education systems they had helped destroy. They traded fairly, even with species that had tried to exterminate them. Within a decade, humanity had gone from galactic enemy to indispensable partner. "That seems implausible," the Rigelian engineer said. "How could they forgive so easily?" "That's the thing about humans," Vextor explained. "They categorize differently than we do. To them, the war was with the old council, not with the species themselves. Once the threat was gone, they were ready to move forward. They have a concept called bygones, letting past conflicts stay in the past. Not forgetting, but not letting history poison the future." He gestured around the bar. "Look at where we are now. This station was built by human engineers. Half the drinks served here are human recipes. The translation system we're using to understand each other, human software. In 50 years, they went from our victims to our partners to, in many ways, our leaders." The young Zealothy warrior finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air. "Do you hate them, the humans? After everything you experienced?" Vextor was quiet for a long moment. "I feared them. For years after the war, I couldn't be in the same room as a human without my scales trying to change color to camouflage. But hate them? No. If anything, I respect them. They showed us something we had forgotten in our centuries of civilized warfare, that some things are worth any price to defend." He stood up, his old joints protesting. "But more than that, they showed us mercy when they had every right to seek revenge. They chose to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than hurt. That takes a strength greater than any weapon." As he moved to leave, the vegan diplomat called out, "Wait, is it true what they say about human veterans? That they suffer even after victory?" Vextor paused at the door. "I've met human veterans. They carry their scars differently than we do. Where I remember the fear, they remember the faces of everyone they lost. Where I have nightmares about human ruthlessness, they have nightmares about becoming what they had to become. They won the war, but they mourn what it cost them to win it." He turned back one last time. "That's the last lesson about humans at war. They will do anything, become anything, destroy anything to protect what they love. But, unlike most species, they never forget the price. They carry it forever, and they work every day to make sure they never have to pay it again. The old soldier left the bar, but his audience remained, sitting in contemplative silence. The young Zealothy warrior looked at his drink, then at the human-designed architecture around him, the human art on the walls, the human music playing softly in the background. "I think," he said quietly, "I understand why the humans are so good at peace. They've seen what they become in war, and they never want to see it again." The Rigelian engineer nodded slowly. "My grandfather used to say the humans were the galaxy's greatest contradiction, capable of unimaginable creation and unthinkable destruction. Artists who could become destroyers. Pacifists who could become perfect warriors. Not contradiction," the vegan diplomat corrected thoughtfully. "Balance. They understand both sides of their nature and choose which to embrace. During the war, they chose destruction because they had to. After the war, they chose creation because they could." The bartender, finally, breaking his silence, began cleaning glasses again. "Vextor comes in here every few months, tells that same story. Each time, more details, more pain in his voice. You know what he told me once? He said the humans have a saying, 'War is hell.' He said he didn't understand it until he fought them. Hell isn't fire and punishment. Hell is what you have to become to survive." The crowd began to disperse slowly, each being lost in their own thoughts. The young warriors who had entered the bar boasting of their prowess left humbled. The merchants who saw humans as easy marks left with new respect. The diplomats who viewed humans as just another species left understanding why humanity held such influence in galactic affairs. As the station's artificial night cycle began, the bar slowly returned to normal. But in quiet corners, beings continued to discuss what they had heard. The story would spread, as it always did after Vextor's visits. Not as propaganda or warning, but as understanding. Humanity's greatest victory wasn't winning the war. It was winning the peace that followed. They had shown the galaxy their teeth, then chosen to smile instead of bite. They had proven they could end everything, then dedicated themselves to building something better. In her quarters, a young human historian finished reviewing the recording she had made of Vextor's story. She had been collecting accounts from all sides of the war, trying to understand how her species had survived and thrived. Each story was different, but the theme was the same. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their creativity or adaptability or even their willingness to sacrifice. It was their choice. The choice to be peaceful when they could be violent. The choice to build when they could destroy. The choice to forgive when they could revenge. Every day, every human made that choice. And every day, the galaxy grew a little brighter because of it. But the memory remained, carried by veterans like Vextor, preserved in stories and songs and silent memorials. A reminder of what humanity could become if pushed too far. A warning and a promise forever intertwined. The war was over. The humans had won. And their victory ensured that such a war would never happen again. Not because others feared human weapons, but because they understood human resolve. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson of all. Never give humanity a reason to stop being humanity. Because what they become instead is something that even victory cannot wash away. They knew it. The galaxy knew it. And in that knowing, peace was preserved. In the empty bar, the bartender poured himself a drink, a human whiskey he had acquired years ago. He raised it silently to the empty chair where Vextor had sat, then to the stars visible through the viewport. A toast to the fallen, to the survivors, and to the choice that kept the darkness at bay. Tomorrow, the station would bustle with trade and laughter, humans and aliens working side by side. But tonight was for remembering, for honoring the price of peace, for understanding why, when humans smiled and offered their hand in friendship, every species in the galaxy gratefully took it. The war was over, but its lessons lived on, and somewhere in the void, ghost ships that no longer existed watched over a peace paid for in blood and tears and impossible choices. A peace that humanity would defend with the same terrible resolve they had once used to defend their very existence. That was the truth about humans. They could be anything they needed to be. They chose to be kind, and the galaxy prayed that choice would never change.